know what those screens are doing for your kids, know the risks for having that drive or that psychological need only being met by this screen, and have a plan to counterbalance it. That's it. That's all there really is to at least my methodology. My name is Kruti Kanogia. I am also known as Mrs. K. I started HealthyGamer with Alok about 5 years ago, and I wanted to share with you guys today the 5 psychological drives that I really pay attention to as a mom when it comes to screen time. These drives are something that we used to talk about a lot with parents in schools, and I think they really helped parents understand what it is that that screen is, or that device is doing for your kid. And now that my kids are playing video games, watching YouTube videos, watching movies, interacting with people on devices, I think it's really interesting how certain personalities gravitate towards certain things. And based on what your kid is doing, there, I think, are different strategies for setting limits and boundaries. So let me talk to you first about my younger daughter, Avi. So Avi she's amazing. She loves snakes and monsters. She's a bit of a tomboy. She's fast. She's physical. She's very, very sweet. But she has trouble making friends. She has trouble keeping friends. She's the type of kid that has 3 or 4 really good friends that love her. And then outside of that, she kind of struggles a bit. She's also, I think, has ADHD tendencies, right in the middle. If we really wanted a diagnosis, we could push for it. If we don't have to. Like, she's right there on the border. She's also really smart, but really frustrated because her smartness doesn't have a place to go. So, for example, she's great at chess. Okay, she's a chess kid. They don't play chess in school. The water cycle, photosynthesis, like that, it's not that interesting to her. But if she goes out in nature and she's around bugs and dirt and whatever, she loves learning about the world around her. So the way she uses screens is very different than the way my older daughter, who can make friends with anyone, any age, anywhere. She is super creative, loves making things with her hands, very patient, can kind of focus on one thing, a little bit perfectionist. They're both, well-spoken, nice, polite kids. Avi's a little bit on the wilder side. Vera's more on the quiet side. So here are like the 5 fundamental needs that I think screens fill. I think is proven. There's plenty of research. The way we kind of boil it down at HealthyGamer, right? The first need is around competitiveness, or a need for accomplishment, or a need for achievement. Okay? So the second need is intellectual stimulation, or a way to kind of flex parts of your brain that you don't normally get to. The third is creativity. A way to be creative that maybe you can't be with like a paintbrush or markers or whatever. And then a 4th fundamental need that screens fill is social or community, a way to make and keep and build friends that you can kind of keep growing with outside of, grade 1 to grade 10. And then the 5th need is escape or adventure, right? And this is like the very common, very typical, like binging a show on Netflix just because you want something to take your mind off the world. Kids absolutely have this too. So the one need that I think my kids both have in common is the escape adventure part. And it's for different reasons though, because for Avi, with her kind of more flighty ADHD mind, she's constantly being told, sit still, do this, you're doing it wrong. So just to away from that. Vera, very kind of classic, smart, does well in school kid. It's always about like, is this good enough? Did I do it right? I want to do it right. She needs a break from that too. So for escape and adventure, the thing that they love to do together are like, these fantasy type movies, these very like dragons and princesses, all of that kind of escapist kind of movies. I'm emphasizing movies because in my house, I want that to be channeled in a longer format way, because having short form content like something under 3 to 5 minutes, it's not good for Avi's ADHD brain, right? Like I can use that fantasy need to help her attention span lengthen. So that's why I emphasize movies there. Another way they bond over that is, and this is their bonding link, this is their common thing. So I try to get them to do this together to fill that social need, right? Which is really helpful for Avi, and it really helps Vera, I think, connect more with her sister who's so different from her. So the second thing that they will do is play games like Super Mario Wonder, something that's age appropriate for them, but is fun and very different from like reality, right? Now, Avi, more on the ADHD side, more flighty, like has a brain that is not challenged in the right way at school. So the way I like to let her use devices is outside of the escapist is around intellectual stimulation and competitiveness. Intellectual stimulation, because again, the way her brain works, she has a bit of a superpower that I've seen with other ADHD kids where, like, especially in like the streamer world, the ability to process lots of information at the same time, as opposed to lots of information over time. To spend 1 hour learning about photosynthesis is going to drive her crazy. But if everything about a plant is on one sheet of paper, she can process that much faster, much more efficiently. So in these video games that have the different stats and counters and points and all of the information being presented in these different ways, it really stretches her brain, and it helps her kind of hone her superpower in a way. So I love that for her. I love the idea of her being able to play those games. And then here's the drawback, right? The drawback is she gets so absorbed in those games that she can only ever have that intellectual piece, that intellectual itch scratched through games. So that's the risk. And the way I would balance that, or the way I do balance that, is I play chess with her at home. So that way she has another way to do something that is information dense, strategic, scratches that itch, gives her kind of a way to be smart and accomplished outside of the game. So that's how I set the boundary around that particular need with Avi. So just to recap, the way I balance the different psychological drives around escape and adventure is by setting a time boundary around it. Only for this long and only long format. The way I set a boundary around intellectual stimulation, because the risk again is that itch is only scratched through a game, is to have one other thing to do. For Avi, it's chess. You might find something else. I encourage you to find something else. That's what works in my house. All right, the third psychological need is competitiveness, a place to be really good at something. And for this, again, I love video games. For Avi, she's not going to win a spelling bee. She's not going to win the science fair. Like, she's not going to be outstanding in those areas. And I don't, of course I want her to learn how to spell. Of course I want her to be good at, that's not the point. The point is, realistically, she should get a sense of being excellent at something. And for that competitive itch to be scratched through a game, the big drawback is that's the only place she will shine. So for us, the boundary around being competitive to have a sense of achievement, we tried to find something that was like an individual sport that she can level up at her own pace, kind of like a video game. For us, that's Taekwondo. Okay, so that's her counter IRL or real life activity to kind of balance that need for achievement for competitiveness. When she got her yellow belt, for example, it was a big day. She was so excited. She wanted to frame her white belt because she had outgrown it. It was so exciting. We had like the board that she bought, like that she chopped in half. It's a big sense of achievement. And to really celebrate that in person is so important. And the need for her to continually feel a sense of accomplishment is also important. So again, I love video games for that. And again, we got to balance it by having a real life activity. And of course, setting limits around how long you're playing and things like that. For the boy moms out there, you're probably getting a lot of, especially around competitiveness, you might be getting a lot of, one more game, mom, one more game. And I think there's a way to draw a boundary that's not frustrating for those competitive kids that are probably playing things like first-person shooters. So I would say two things in that case. One is no headphones, because the risk around some of those first-person shooter games is really around the toxic things that they can hear from other players. So no headphones. Everything that they hear, you hear. And the second thing I would say for really competitive boy mom kids is around having a time boundary that feels fair. So a lot of times, just one more game, just one more game, just one more game. Don't say 5 o'clock, say 5 games. And you can also say, hey, if you're winning, you can play one more, but that's it. And if you're losing kind of 2 games in a row, let's take a break. Maybe you can play again tomorrow or tonight or whatever. But like set that boundary kind of ahead of time if you can. And if you feel like it's impossible to set a boundary, I think the HealthyGamer parent resources are excellent at helping you kind of work through boundary setting. Okay, so that's Avi, right? She shares adventure with Vera. That's their thing, adventure or escape. Avi in particular really gravitates towards that sense of achievement, that sense of being able to use the strategy part of her brain or that intellectual stimulation that she doesn't get to in school. For Vera, she really leans into the 2 other psychological drives that video games and screens can really fill. The first for her is creativity. She's a creative kid. She likes to sew. She likes to draw. She likes to paint. She loves to make cards for people. She likes to use her hands. So for screens for creativity, this is like the exception I'll make to the short form rule, because sometimes it's fun to just look for inspiration. And so that I'll kind of say, hey, you've had a really hard week. You've been doing science fair stuff. Like, she needs a creative outlet. She didn't get to go to sewing. She hasn't been able to do her stuff, right? So why don't you try to find us a project that we can do together? Is there anything you want to paint? Maybe we can stop by the craft store over the weekend. Why don't you find some things that you feel good about painting? And then she can go through the short form stuff. Hey, bookmark those, send them to me. Let's see if we can do it together. Or art tutorials. And like, I don't expect her, it happens sometimes without me prompting. I don't expect her to go get a pen and paper and like pretend she's in art class. It's totally fine. Like, I watched Bob Ross and cooking shows. It's the same need. The main thing to counterbalance that, and you'll probably relate to this, it's frustrating, it's defeating to always be looking at something aspirational and never attempt it yourself. So I try to make sure that we're actually doing some of these things. Let's watch British Baking Show. Love that show. And let's bake something together this weekend. Is it going to be as good as stuff on that show? Of course not. But is it fun? And does it feel more like you're participating in something creative? Yes. Because like, think about yourself, right? If you're looking at all these unattainable houses or all of these DIY projects or all of these beautiful things, and you never kind of do anything about it yourself, then you're constantly seeing other people having things and doing things and feeling more and more removed from your ability to do those things. Right? But if you go and do a DIY project, you're like, hey, look at this. I can do that. I can have a home like that one day. It's more inspirational than aspirational, if that makes sense. So that's the boundary I kind of set around creative stuff is short form, fine, but let's go try something ourselves too. And that's a bond we have is around creativity. So if that's something that's challenging for you, I would encourage like a class of some sort. And that really can get expensive. Like, I get it. That's why I let my kids use devices. You can't keep going from class to class and paying 25, 30, whatever, an hour. Like, there's too many hours. We need these devices, right? Like, just as working parents, you need them. And it's okay to need them. And I don't buy into any of these like extremist viewpoints of like no screens before a certain age or only this. No, it's just about balance, right? Like, know what those screens are doing for your kids. Know the risks for having that drive or that psychological need only being met by this screen, and have a plan to counterbalance it. That's it. That's all there really is to at least my methodology, which again is inspired by all of our work at HealthyGamer. We've been doing this for ever. It feels like 5 years realistically. We've got all like we know what we're doing. This is the way I implement it in our house. All right, the fifth one, social. And this one is probably the most important because it is such a dire time to be a kid right now. Our kids are collectively, this generation of kids is the most lonely, the most anxious, the most depressed, the most over-medicated, underdiagnosed, undertreated. Like it's really bleak, right? So the way games fill our social need is probably the most important and also the most complicated. I'll tell you, I met some of my husband's friends for the first time at our wedding. And these are friends that he had had for 10 years. These were the friends he first told about our relationship. And, we met in college, right? So the college friends might not still be friends or as close with now, but these online friends have been friends ever since. And they know so much more about our lives. And in a lot of ways, that friendship is a lot deeper. So understanding the nature of online friendships is really important. So if it's the social need that is being met by the device for your kid, here are the boundaries I would look at. One is, again, no headphones. Especially around a certain age, you need to know what's going on. You need to know what's being said. You don't, unlike in-person friendships, you don't know who these kids are or if they're even kids, right? So the online safety bit is really important. For this, we have partners over at Bark. If you want to check them out, I think they have really great monitoring tools. Other things that really help kind of enforce boundaries around social stuff with your kids. Because what's the risk? The risk is they can't develop in-person friendships. They lose their own social skills in person, which we see a lot. They're only communicating by text. And so their affect, their way they present in person becomes really flat. And so their ability to connect with people in person just kind of atrophies. And that's the big risk, right? So you want an IRL activity, whether it's a sport or something more individual like Taekwondo or a certain class, volunteering, whatever, just something that's in person with other people that lets them animate and express themselves. And then this really depends on when you get involved in your kids' kind of digital life, at what age. But in my kind of ideal world, I know who these kids' parents are and we're on a WhatsApp group. And we together can decide like, hey, can we turn it off at a certain time? Or, hey, I'm hearing some chatter that I'm not comfortable with. Does anybody know where this came from? Don't blame people, please. But just ask, like, make sure that you're connected to the parents of the kids that your kid is interacting with. And that requires a really strong parent-child alliance. So if that's something you're struggling with, that's another place where HealthyGamer parent programs really shine. But I hope this helps. I hope understanding these 5 different psychological needs that devices fill, understanding each of their drawbacks and how to maybe counterbalance them. I hope it was helpful. And just a quick recap, they were adventure or escapism, intellectual stimulation or intellectual challenge, creativity, competitiveness, and social needs or community. See you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.